My fiancé's family thought I was an orphan. They saw my secondhand dress, my quiet nature, and the way I carried myself without the weight of a famous last name. They decided I was a charity case, someone their son had picked up along the way, a stray to be pitied and quietly managed. The first dinner at their estate was a quiet lesson in judgment. His mother didn't ask about my job or my interests. She asked who raised me. I told her my grandmother. She took a slow sip of wine and said, "How humble." The word hung between us, not as a compliment but as a diagnosis. His father carved his steak without looking up. "And what did your grandmother do for a living?" "She was a librarian," I said. He nodded once, a slow, final gesture. In his mind, that single fact explained everything about me. My lack of connections, my simple clothes, my place in the world. Later, his sister Serena found me alone in their vast manicured garden. She lit a slender cigarette and blew the smoke away from her face. "You know," she began, her voice sweetly sharp, "Ethan has always had a soft spot for strays. Lost dogs, broken birds, people like you." I didn't respond. I just let her words settle in the evening air. She took another drag. "This family has a reputation," she continued. "A certain standing. We can't have my brother marrying a girl with no name, no lineage, no background. You understand, don't you?" I met her gaze and said nothing. She smiled, a cold, polished thing. "Of course you do." That night, Ethan held me in his old childhood bedroom, the room filled with trophies and privilege. "They'll come around," he whispered into my hair. "Once they really get to know you, they'll love you like I do." But I had seen the way his mother's eyes skimmed over my dress. I had heard the careful silence that followed my answers. They didn't want to know me, they wanted to tolerate me. And tolerance, in their world, was a form of polite contempt. A week later, the whole family gathered in the formal sitting room. Mrs. Harrington presented a leather-bound planner, its pages filled with venue layouts, floral arrangements, and a guest list that seemed to stretch for miles. "The engagement party will be at the country club," she announced with a satisfied smile. 200 of our closest friends and associates." Then she turned that smile to me. It was gentle, patronizing. "Nova, dear, you must invite your family. I'm sure your grandmother would be thrilled to see you in a proper setting for once." The room felt still, waiting for my gratitude. I let the silence sit for just a moment too long. Then I returned her smile, just as gentle. "Actually," I said, my voice clear and steady in the quiet room, "my parents will be coming." The air changed. Serena's head snapped toward me, her polite mask slipping into disbelief. "Your parents?" she echoed. A laugh caught in her throat. "Yes," I said, holding her gaze without blinking. "They've been traveling extensively for work, but they've assured me they wouldn't miss this for the world." Mrs. Harrington's smile had frozen into something brittle. I didn't realize you had parents," she said softly, her confusion genuine. "Most people do," I replied, my tone unchanged. Ethan was staring at me, his eyes wide with a mix of confusion and concern. He reached for my hand under the table. His touch was warm, familiar, but his grip was tight with unasked questions. I simply squeezed back and gave him a small, reassuring smile. In that moment, sitting in their perfect room surrounded by their perfect things, I felt a shift. The invisible lines they had drawn around me began to blur. The game they thought they were playing had just changed, and I was no longer just a player. I had just changed the rules. The week that followed was draped in a heavy, watchful silence. The Harringtons didn't call. Serena didn't text. It was as if my announcement had pressed a pause button on their world, and they were all waiting to see if my words were real or just a desperate bluff. I went back to my small apartment above the bookstore, back to the life they thought was so small. But the air felt different now, lighter. It no longer felt like a confinement, but like a quiet stage before the curtains open. Ethan came over 2 nights after the announcement. He found me curled on my secondhand sofa with a book, the same one I'd been reading for weeks. He sat beside me, his expression a tangle of affection and unease. "Nova," he began, his voice careful. "Who are they? These parents of yours. You've never mentioned them before, not once. I closed my book and set it aside. They're people from my grandmother's past, I said, which was true, if not complete. They owe her a great deal, more than money. But why now? He pressed, his hand finding mine. Why tell my family like that? You saw their faces. My mother looked like she'd seen a ghost. That's why, I said simply. I wanted them to see something they couldn't explain. For once, I didn't want to be the one who had to explain myself. He studied me, his kind eyes searching mine. Are they good people, these parents of yours? I believe they are, I said. And I did. My grandmother had only ever spoken of them with a profound, quiet respect. She had called them the keepers of a promise. The day of the party dawned clear and cold. The Harringtons Country Club was a monument to understated wealth, gleaming marble, towering floral arrangements, and the soft murmur of 200 people who all knew each other's net worth. I wore a simple emerald gown, one I'd saved for months to buy. Serena, in a dress that likely cost more than my car, gave me a once-over as I arrived. Charming, she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Is it vintage? Something like that, I replied. His mother floated over, her champagne flute held like a scepter. Nova, dear, your grandmother, she decided not to come after all? The pity was back, thick and sweet as syrup. She sends her love, I said. My parents should be here any moment. I watched the clock. Dinner was served. Plates of exquisite, untouched food circulated. I saw the glances exchanged between Serena and her mother, a subtle, satisfied nod. They thought I'd lied. They thought I'd shown up alone, that my parents were a fantasy. And then, a sound cut through the soft string quartet, a deep rhythmic thrumming that grew from a hum to a roar. The crystal glasses on the tables began to tremble, singing a faint, high note. Heads turned. Guests drifted toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the golf course. Outside, descending through the twilight like something from a film, was a sleek, obsidian-black private helicopter. It hovered for a breathtaking moment, its rotors whipping the grass below into a frenzy, before settling gracefully on the 18th green. The entire ballroom fell silent. The music had stopped. Every eye was fixed on the scene outside. The helicopter door slid open. A man stepped out first, tall, with silver hair, dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of quiet authority. Then a woman, elegant and poised in a gown of deep midnight blue. She took his offered hand. They moved across the manicured lawn not like guests, but like owners. There was a certainty in their stride that silenced the room even further, because as I would later learn, they did own it. The club, the land, the very air felt like it belonged to them in that moment. They entered through the terrace doors, which a stunned waiter hurried to hold open. The crowd parted without a word, a silent sea of black ties and diamonds making way. They walked directly to me. The man extended his hand first to Ethan, who stood beside me, pale and speechless. Alistair Vance, he said, his voice calm yet carrying to every corner of the still room. You must be Ethan. We've heard wonderful things. Then he turned to me. His stern expression softened into something unmistakably paternal. Nova, he said. He leaned in and kissed my cheek. The woman, Isadora, embraced me next, her arms strong and sure around me. Darling, she whispered, her voice meant only for me, yet perfectly audible in the hush. You look absolutely beautiful. I saw Mrs. Harrington's champagne flute tremble in her hand. Mr. Harrington had gone ashen. Serena looked from me to the Vances and back again, her mouth slightly agape, all her polished composure shattered. Alistair Vance turned, his arm resting lightly on my shoulders, and addressed the room. Thank you, he said, his tone warm but firm, for welcoming our daughter into your family. We've been abroad, but we wouldn't have missed this for the world. The spell broke. The room erupted into applause, polite, bewildered, thrilled applause. But the Harringtons did not clap. They stood perfectly still, a frozen portrait of shock, in the center of the warm, approving crowd. And in that moment, as the sound of clapping filled the gilded room, their perfect, pitying world stopped spinning. The applause died down, but the silence that followed was louder. All eyes were on the Harringtons, waiting for their move. Mrs. Harrington's social instincts flickered to life first. She stepped forward, her smile brittle but determined. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice a notch too high. "What an unexpected delight. We had no idea." Alistair Vance turned his gaze toward her, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not cruelty, but a deep, patient understanding of the game being played. "We prefer to keep our family life private," he said smoothly. "But for Nova, we make exceptions." His words were a velvet glove around an iron fist. For Nova. He had drawn a line in the marble floor, and I was on his side of it. Serena recovered next, her cheeks flushed with a mix of shock and a desperate need to regain footing. "You must join us at our table," she said, gesturing too widely toward the head of the room. "We have so much to catch up on." Isadora Vance looped her arm through mine. "We'd be delighted," she said, her tone gracious yet unmistakably in control. As we moved through the crowd, I felt the weight of 200 stares. Whispers trailed behind us like shadows. I heard my name, heard Vance, heard helicopter. The orphan charity case had vanished. In her place was Nova Vance, a mystery wrapped in a billion-dollar name. We sat. The Harrington family, usually so sprawling and dominant at a table, seemed to shrink. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "Alistair, your work with the Vance Foundation in Eastern Europe has been remarkable. I read the Financial Times feature." Alistair nodded politely. "Philanthropy is a responsibility, not a headline." Then he turned his attention to Ethan. "Ethan, Nova tells us you're in sustainable architecture. That's the future. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the new carbon-negative materials." Just like that, the power in the room tilted. Ethan, who had spent the last year being subtly admonished by his father for not joining the family business, straightened in his chair. He began to speak, his passion for his work pushing past his nerves. Alistair listened intently. Isadora asked thoughtful questions. For the first time all evening, Ethan was being seen. I watched Serena watch them. Her expression was a storm of envy and calculation. She kept glancing at me, as if trying to solve a puzzle she hadn't known existed. After dessert, Alistair asked if he might have a word with Mr. Harrington privately. The two men disappeared into the club's oak-paneled library. Mrs. Harrington tried to engage Isadora in a conversation about summer homes, but Isadora gently steered it back to me, my interests, my work at the bookstore, my love for vintage literature. "She has her grandmother's mind," Isadora said to Mrs. Harrington, a subtle edge in her voice. "A sharp, curious mind. A terrible thing to waste, don't you think?" Mrs. Harrington could only nod, her smile strained. When the men returned nearly 20 minutes later, Mr. Harrington looked pale. He kept adjusting his cufflinks, a nervous habit I'd never seen before. Alistair looked as composed as when he'd entered. "We should be going," Alistair said, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Early flight to Zurich. Board meetings wait for no one." He shook Ethan's hand again, firmly. "Take good care of her." It wasn't a request. Isadora hugged me once more. "We'll call you next week, darling," she said, her voice warm. Then softer for my ear only, she added, "You did perfectly." Their exit was as dramatic as their entrance. They did not say goodbye to the room. They simply walked out, back across the terrace, toward the helicopter waiting under the now star-filled sky. The rotors began to spin, the sound once again drowning out all conversation. Then they lifted off, a dark silhouette against the moon, and were gone. The party didn't end so much as it deflated. The energy left with them. Guests began making their excuses, casting final, curious looks at me and the shell-shocked Harringtons. Back in the grand foyer, finally alone as a family, the silence was suffocating. Serena was the first to break it. "You set us up," she hissed, her polished facade gone, replaced by raw anger. "You let us look like fools. You humiliated us in front of everyone." Ethan stepped closer to me. "Serena, that's enough." "No, it's not," she snapped. "Who are they, really? Some actors you hired? People you found online?" "They're the people who owe my grandmother their lives," I said, my voice quiet but clear in the vast space. "And they came because I asked them to. Not to humiliate you, to show you that you don't know the first thing about me. Mr. Harrington finally spoke, his voice weary. Alistair Vance just offered me a partnership, he said. All eyes turned to him. A merger of our media holdings with the Vance Group's European assets. It's the deal of a lifetime. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than dismissal or pity in his eyes. I saw fear. He said the proposal would be on my desk Monday, and that his lawyers would be in touch with Nova's representatives to discuss her interests. The word representatives hung in the air. I had no representatives, but after tonight, perhaps I would. Mrs. Harrington sank into a velvet settee, her hand to her forehead. I don't understand any of this, she murmured. Ethan took my hand, his grip firm. I think we're done here, he said to his family. He led me out of the club, away from the glittering ruin of their party, into the cool night. In the car, he didn't start the engine right away. He just looked at me, the dashboard light softening his features. Who are you, Nova? He asked, but it wasn't an accusation. It was a wonder. I leaned my head against the window, watching the country club lights twinkle in the distance. I'm the same person I've always been, I said. They're just finally starting to see me. And as we drove away, I knew the helicopter was gone, but the echo of its rotors would linger in that family's life forever. The game wasn't over. It had just entered a new, uncharted round. The morning after the party, my small apartment felt like the eye of a storm. Quiet, but charged with the energy of what had shattered the world outside. Ethan stayed over, holding me through the night as if I might vanish. When the sun filtered through my gauzy curtains, he made coffee in my tiny kitchen, his movements thoughtful and slow. My father called, he said, handing me a chipped mug. At 7 a.m. I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my palms. And? He wants you to come to the house, today, to talk. I sipped the coffee. It was bitter, strong, just how I liked it. What do you think he wants to talk about? Ethan ran a hand through his hair. The deal, the Vances, you. He looked at me, his eyes soft with concern. He's shaken, Nova. I've never seen him like this. I agreed to go, not out of obligation, but curiosity. I wanted to see the aftermath up close. The Harrington estate in daylight was a different beast. Without the party lights and the crowd, it looked stark, almost severe. Mrs. Harrington answered the door herself, without the housekeeper. She was dressed in casual linens, but her posture was rigid. Nova, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Thank you for coming. They're in the study. They. Ethan and I followed her. Mr. Harrington and Serena were already there, seated in leather armchairs that seemed to swallow them. The proposal from Alistair Vance lay open on the massive oak desk between us. It was a simple document, barely 3 pages. Its power was in its letterhead and its signature line. Sit, please, Mr. Harrington said. He didn't look like a titan of industry today. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, and the ghost had offered him a business proposition. I sat. Ethan stood behind my chair, a silent sentinel. This offer, Mr. Harrington began, tapping the paper. It's generous, more than generous. It would secure our family's position for the next 50 years. He paused, choosing his words like stepping stones across a river. Alistair was clear. His involvement is contingent. On what? I asked, though I already knew. On you, Serena cut in, her voice sharp. She leaned forward. On your comfort, on your happiness within this family. She spat the words like they were a personal insult. He asked my father if you were being treated like a daughter. A Vance daughter. The room was silent. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly. And what did you tell him? I asked Mr. Harrington. He met my gaze, and for the first time, he didn't look through me. He looked at me. I told him we were doing everything to make you feel welcome. He swallowed. It wasn't entirely true, was it? I didn't answer. The truth was sitting heavy in the room between us. What would make it true? He asked. The question was raw, stripped of pretense. It was the sound of a businessman negotiating for something he suddenly realized was priceless. I thought of the cold dinners, the pitying smiles, the roses in the garden, bred for beauty but without scent. I thought of the word humble, spoken like a sentence. "I don't want an apology," I said finally. My voice was quiet, but it filled the study. "I don't want a seat at the table just because my last name might be Vance one day." I looked at Serena, then back at her father. "I want you to look at Ethan when he talks about his work, and really see the man he is, not the successor you wanted. I want you to look at me and see a person, not a project, not a charity case, not a problem to be managed." Mrs. Harrington drew a sharp, quiet breath. Serena looked away, her jaw tight. "And the deal?" Mr. Harrington pressed, his eyes locked on mine. "The deal is between you and Alistair Vance," I said. "It has nothing to do with me." I let the words hang. They all knew it was a lie. The deal had everything to do with me. It was a test, and we all knew who was holding the answer key. I stood up. Ethan's hand found mine instantly. "I think we're done here," I said, echoing his words from the night before. We left them there, in that opulent study, with their billion-dollar future sitting on a desk, waiting for a verdict from the girl they'd once dismissed. That evening, back in my apartment, I took out the platinum credit card Isadora had given me. I still hadn't used it. I held it, feeling the crisp, embossed edges. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the only number she had written on the accompanying note. She answered on the second ring. "Nova." Her voice was warm, expecting. "I met with the Harringtons today," I said. "And they're scared." Isadora's soft laugh came through the line. "Good. Fear is the beginning of respect." She paused. "Did you ask them for anything?" "No." "Even better." I could hear the smile in her voice. "Alistair's proposal is real, you know. The deal is solid. It's good business. But he'll withdraw it in a heartbeat if you say the word. All you have to do is call." I looked out my window at the quiet city street below, so different from the Harringtons' manicured world. "I don't want to control them," I said. "I just didn't want them to control me." "Oh, my dear," Isadora sighed, a sound of deep understanding. "You already have. The moment that helicopter landed, you took back the narrative. Everything now is just editing." We talked for a few more minutes, about nothing, about everything. She asked about my grandmother's old recipes. I asked about Zurich. When we hung up, the room felt different, larger. Ethan was watching me from the kitchen doorway. "You're really not going to tell them what to do about the deal, are you?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, the power isn't in making the choice for them. The power is that they know I could." He walked over and pulled me into his arms, resting his chin on my head. "I love you," he murmured into my hair. "All of you. The girl from the bookstore and the girl with the helicopter parents. They're both you." I buried my face in his chest, breathing him in. The war wasn't over. The party was just one battle. But for the first time, I was no longer on the defensive. I was no longer just surviving their world. I was changing it. The final meeting took place not in the Harrington study, but in the sleek, silent conference room of Vance Holdings. Alistair had requested it. He believed in setting the stage. We were all there. The Harringtons sat on one side of a polished marble table, a united front of navy suits and tense smiles. Ethan and I sat beside Alistair and Isadora on the other. The air hummed with the quiet power of decisions about to be made. Alistair didn't speak of mergers first. He spoke of legacy. He turned a photograph on the table toward Mr. Harrington. It was a black and white image of a much younger Isadora, standing beside my grandmother outside a small library. They were both smiling, arms linked. "Eleanor saved my wife," Alistair said, his voice low and clear. "Not just gave her shelter, saved her, gave her a voice, taught her that her past did not own her future." He looked at me, his gaze softening. When Nova called, it was not a request. It was an opportunity to repay a debt we could never fully settle. Mr. Harrington stared at the photo, his composure cracking at the edges. He was a man who understood balance sheets, not this kind of emotional arithmetic. Isadora spoke next. We are not here to intimidate you. We are here to clarify. Nova is under our protection. That is not a threat. It is a fact. She folded her hands on the table. How you proceed with her will determine how we proceed with you. The ultimatum was delivered without malice. It was simply the truth, laid bare. Then, Alistair slid the formal merger agreement across the table. It was thick, bound in leather. Next to it, he placed a single, one-page addendum. At the top, it read, Family Conduct Agreement. Serena leaned forward, her eyes scanning the document. Her face paled as she read. It was simple. It stipulated that the merger's success and the annual release of Vance Capital was contingent on a yearly review. A review of my treatment within the Harrington family. The reviews would be conducted by an independent party chosen by the Vances. There were no specific rules, no demands for apologies or forced affection. Just a simple chilling clause, shall be judged on the genuine integration and respect afforded to Nova Harrington, née Vance. It was a leash made of silk and signed in billion-dollar ink. Mr. Harrington looked from the addendum to me. You agreed to this? I met his gaze. I didn't draft it, but I understand it. I paused, letting the silence emphasize my next words. I don't want your money. I never did. I just didn't want to be your charity case anymore. This, I gestured to the page, is just insurance that I never will be again. Ethan's hand found mine under the table. He squeezed, his grip firm with pride. Mrs. Harrington finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. What do you want from us, Nova? It was the first time she had ever asked me a real question. I want you to see your son, I said, looking at her, then at her husband. I want you to look at him and see the brilliant, kind man he is, not the heir you're trying to sculpt. I want you to come to our small wedding and mean the blessing you give. I want to come to Sunday dinner and not feel the ghost of every pitying glance you ever gave me. I took a breath. I just want to be a person in your eyes, not a project, not a pawn, a person. The room was profoundly still. Alistair stood. We'll give you the room to discuss. He and Isadora left, their exit as quiet as their entrance had been loud. The moment the door clicked shut, Serena put her head in her hands. This is insane, she muttered. No, Mr. Harrington said, his voice weary but clear. He was looking at the photo of my grandmother and Isadora. It's justice. He looked up at me. I'll sign it. 2 weeks later, Ethan and I were married. Not at the country club, but in the garden of my grandmother's old cottage. Isadora helped me into my simple lace dress. Alistair walked me down the overgrown rose path. The Harringtons came. They sat in the second row. They did not make a toast. But when Mr. Harrington shook Ethan's hand after the ceremony, he pulled him into a brief, tight hug. When Mrs. Harrington kissed my cheek, her eyes were glistening. It wasn't perfect. It was real. Serena handed me a small, unwrapped box as she left. Inside was a single, perfect pearl on a chain. The card read, "For the sister I never saw coming." The merger went through. The Vance capital flowed. But more importantly, Sunday dinners changed. The conversations were quieter, less performative. They asked about my work at the bookstore. Ethan talked about his projects without interruption. One evening, months later, as I helped Mrs. Harrington clear the dessert plates, she stopped me in the kitchen. She looked older, softer. I am sorry, Nova, she said, the words seeming to cost her something, for not seeing you. I know, I said, and I did. That night, as Ethan and I drove back to our own small house, bought with our own money, I looked at the moon through the car window. The helicopter was gone. The gilded cage of their pity was gone. All that was left was the quiet, solid ground of a life built on my own terms. The orphan they invented had disappeared forever. In her place stood a woman who was finally, completely seen.